So a few things that come to mind. We're obviously in a transitional time, the North American church. It feels like, by and large, we're playing catch up, and there's some major shifts that have happened in culture that have dislodged us from the traditional place that the church has been. I think that's really clear. One of the best, most helpful books that I've read for navigating this is called Canoeing the Mountains. If you want to pick it up, it's well worth your time. It's not just prescriptive. It does talk about the problem and talks about here's what's shifting in our country, but it also talks about adaptive leadership and what does it look like for us to realize the tools that we were trained with aren't working right now. So he uses the Lewis and Clark analogy. He says Lewis and Clark, they are canoemen. They are thinking we are going to make this amazing path, this breakthrough, because we know how to use canoes, and we are going to find a water passageway, and that's what we do. And then it talked about them for months traveling around and hiking around with their canoes up against the Rocky Mountains, looking for that water passageway, and that at some point they had to put down their canoes and realize that everything that they were trained to do wasn't going to work based on the new landscape that was in front of them. It is a brilliant metaphor for where most of us are when we think about church leadership. Most of the tools that we were given in seminary are not working in their current cultural context. So I want to agree that everything is changing. The idea of us separating and becoming less engaged in the culture and withdrawing from culture is a crazy thought. It's like an anti-biblical thought. So like for us to, I'm not saying that there's not a value of holiness. We definitely need more of that. I think that's something that's lacking in a big way. But for us to withdraw away from culture, I love the Acts 17 passage. Paul's sitting there in Athens and he's looking, so think about this passage in light of this, this theory of we just need to withdraw. Paul is sitting there looking at all these people in Athens and he looks at them and he says, hey, listen, I can tell you're really religious. I saw an idol today that said to the unknown God. He uses their pagan idol. He uses their culture as a bridge into Jesus and into telling them about God. He says, hey, let me tell you about the unknown God, which was, so I think that in what this does, that literal neighboring forces our people to be out in culture. What literal neighboring does, the only place where it ever gets scary is if the people that we're talking to, sometimes our people in our churches are addicts, and going and they use literal neighboring to start showing up to all the parties and stuff that are going on in their neighborhood, and sometimes you get to a place where you're whoa, hey, you're fragile. You need to come back a little bit more because you're throwing yourself back into some addictive behavior because you're being such a good neighbor. But and the spiritual discipline that nobody ever wants to talk about is this. Everybody, when you talk, what would Jesus do, brace all that stuff, it's Jesus would pray, and he was solitude, and he studied the word. The spiritual discipline that nobody ever wants to talk about is the discipline of hanging out with people that are so sketchy that you make the religious people uncomfortable. Jesus does this over and over again. He's always, if you want to be like Jesus, when's the last time you were making the religious people uncomfortable because of the crowd that you're hanging out with?